The opposition, on the other hand, unlike 1979, is deeply fragmented, has no clear leadership, no clear set of goals, and therefore finds it difficult, as unlike 1979, when the clerics were in the waiting room, there's no obvious Iranian group in the waiting room today. So I think we all have to be very careful. And we have to be particularly careful, in my judgment, not to let our wishes, our feelings of being disobliged, our feelings of anger at the suffering that's going on, to confuse those sentiments with reality. Reality has still to play out, and we are best to exercise a degree of patience and watch very carefully how the protests play. We shouldn't lose sight that first and foremost, we have to keep a very sharp eye on American interests. The peace and stability of the region depends on how Iran is dealt with, the role that Iran plays, and where our policy affects Iran's situation. For Iran, I don't have to remind any of you, is a very important regional power. Its location gives it reach into many other areas in the world, importance to us, but its endowment, its ability to maintain very considerable military prowess, its economic strength, for it survived 30 years of sanctions, its ability to generate technology. Look at these drones. It's an educational endowment that now educates more women than men. There really, truly is no peer competitor in the Middle East quite like Iran. And we can't ignore it or wish it out of existence any more than we can believe there is an easy way out, that somehow protests will lead to the fall of the regime. We have virtually weekly, monthly occurrences on the waters of the Gulf or in Iraq with Iranian rocketry and Iranian naval deployments disturbing the areas that we operate in. The drone incident of a couple of weeks ago, in which the Iranians seized an American naval drone zone, remind us just on how close to the edge all of us are seated. And to make matters worse, we find ourselves with no effective communications with Iran, no ability to manage a crisis in real time with the Iranian regime. There is no diplomatic representation. All other representations are indirect. We have no way to deconflict forces. And we haven't had since Trump most unwisely pulled out of the JCPOA and the Iranians stopped communicating with us even in that context. I appreciate the question, but I'd like to put it back to the person who asked it. Have we not had 30 years, coming on 40 years, of punishing Iran, of believing that pressures and beleaguerment will bring about some fundamental change in Iranian policy? Have we not engaged in the most elaborated and sustained sanctions effort, maybe Cuba is an exception, in the history of the United States, and to what effect? Has Iran made less progress on the nuclear front? Is it less involved in disrupting the region? Has it slowed down its capacity to develop awesome weapons systems? Has it ended up being less of a threat to friends and allies in the Gulf area? What have our punishments that the questioner would like to double down on achieved? Now, I'm not saying that we have to show the white feather, but at the same time, I think it's time to ask fundamentally, what is the effect of what we've done, and with the very limited options still available, what effect that would have on Iranian behavior. Iran's a rich nation in culture and civilization. Its education system is really quite remarkable. By cutting ourselves off from it, we've had less impact and less profit from its findings. And just as even more important, the Iranians haven't had access to what we think and what we're working on in this country. We're both poorer. They probably poorer than we. But let's go back to an earlier question. Has that changed the regime's mind? Has it said we ought to go down on a bended knee to the United States? No, of course not. They've tended to head in the opposite direction, towards autonomous behavior, to reinforce their domestic capabilities. It's one of the great ironies of sanctions, that sanctions can end up producing even a more successful sanctions busting regime by the imposition of sanctions, and that the country ends up with more autonomous capability as a result of sanctions.
آنچه در مورد ما میگویند